Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. McDodd. That was terrific. Next, we're going to hear from Derek Yach, who is joining us by the benefits of modern technology, so he will be joining us virtually. Derek is the Global Chief Health Officer for Vitality, and for the past 2 years has served as Executive Director of the Vitality Institute. He has also held senior positions at PepsiCo, the Rockefeller Foundation, and WHO, and he has authored or co-authored over 200 articles on global health. So with that, I'll turn it over to Derek, and then following Derek's talk, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A for both speakers.
Thanks, Brenda. Is my slide up at all?
Yes.
Hello? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Derek, and it's up.
Great, okay. Well, thanks, and real apologies for not making it. I can assure you that I'm able to follow and hopefully contribute. I'm going to complement, I think, a lot of what Mark and Ali started talking about now. And let me jump straight in. What I hope to do is very briefly touch on this issue that came up earlier around what are public health leaders saying about the private sector, and then really move to the theme of saying how do we use market forces more effectively to advance global health, and within that context, focus on metrics briefly. So let's just ask that question: what do public health leaders say about the private sector? And I think we need to have a very strong sense of the historical development of this trust, from the public health side particularly. And a lot of it really started way back with the concerns about baby killers published way back when Nestle was accused of killing babies through infant formula. And of course, tobacco companies were accused then and still are today of killing people through their core products and services. That reality played out for many decades, and I believe built a cadre of people both within the public health sector, of which I would say I was one during those years, who really believe that you simply can't trust industry. And to show that it's pervasive and continues today, one simply needs to read Marion Nestle's book on soda that came out just a month ago to get a sense of where current dealing is. This is really important for us to have uppermost in our mind because it isn't theoretical anymore. It does play out in terms of WHO. And what I list on this slide are just a few quotes from speeches that Margaret Chan gave over the last month. In fact, it's one key speech she gave to the Regional Committee of Europe in Lithuania in September, where you can see very clearly strong anti-industry statements which couldn't be more explicit. This, I think, reflects both the concerns that she picked up from NGOs, the frustration by many in public health that we're not seeing fast enough action on NCDs, and the easy opportunity to place all the blame for failure on the private sector as opposed to the role of government. But this is the reality we face in 2015, and I suspect for a few years to move ahead. Given that reality, what opportunity do we have for shared value? And let's start taking a look. I think we already heard in the opening address by Brenda that we see shared value in health applying at three levels. Employee health, where clearly that's the driver of productivity itself, companies' core products and services, and community investment in community health. My colleague Brett Trump will tomorrow go into greater detail on employee health, and I'll only touch on that. And I know in the room we have some of the real world leaders like Ray Fabius who will pick this up later. So I'm going to mainly focus on the second category. And within that, ask the question about how important metrics are to really assure that we're seeing progress. We know the old adage that what gets measured gets done, and what gets measured and fed back gets done well. What gets rewarded gets repeated. And behavioral economic theory shows that's the case. The problem, of course, is that we don't have enough reporting to a CFO, to a CEO, and to the major bodies who really look at companies on the health implications of corporations. What is very important, and I think that Mark was starting to hint at it, is that we are starting to see the growing recognition of non-financial measures as determinants of long-term profitability. And many of the bodies listed on this slide are very engaged in different aspects of addressing environmental, social, governance, diversity, black empowerment issues as key to assessing whether a company's performance long-term will do well or not do well. And I would urge those who want to go into greater depth. I have got a narrative version of what I'm saying, which goes into some of it in greater detail and gives the references which my IO and colleagues could provide. We know that if we continue down the path of private-public partnerships either being restricted to corporate social responsibility or true engagement being seen as suspicious by both sides, we won't make progress. What we really need to do is to find a new way forward, and I think that's what shared value is doing. And we're seeing the result of it reported in recent magazines. Fortune, for example, listing 50 companies that are changing the world. Some of them include oil and gas, some pharma, retail, food, insurance, each coming from a different starting point, but each in their own way starting to address a social issue through their core business practices. That represents a huge opportunity for us, even in the most complex areas of health. We all believe we need a framework to really understand what drives long-term corporate profitability. And the framework we use quite extensively is the IIRC framework of the International Integrated Reporting Council, which really identifies six key capitals that drive business performance and lead to fixed output. You'll see the slide here identifying financial, manufactured, intellectual, social and relationship, and natural capital. And the one we're really interested in is human capital. We know that human capital is both an input and an output of a company's performance. It is embedded in a very limited way in a number of frameworks, but tends to be restricted to occupational health and safety, which really is a reflection of the historical importance of being concerned about injuries at work as opposed to the overall health status of people. We'll see increasingly that broader aspects of health will become important, as I'm sure Brett will identify. And already there are some important indications that companies, certainly in the U.S., are reporting on the importance of health in their 10K reports, again, highlighted in the slide. I won't spoil Ray's thunder, but we all hopefully will see this several times during the next 2 days. But this is becoming a classic representation on the value of good employee health for long-term stock performance. This kind of data is maybe of less interest to epidemiologists or public health people, but of enormous interest to the CFO and the CEO of a company. I also won't go into the type of metrics now, given the time constraints, and move more explicitly to the question of products and services. So if you look at the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which is a family of indexes that assesses corporate performance around the world, every year they put out the top performers in different categories. And I went through these to look at, is health currently featuring in the narrative? And very importantly, in the company that won the consumer services division, the Sodexo, a very large food service company, the analysts are saying that there's a challenging business environment from increasingly health-conscious consumers will force companies to innovate their products and services. This is not coming from a health group. This is coming from the investor and asset manager class who are aware that if companies go this route of addressing health, they will be better performers in the long term. Metro Macro from Germany won the prize, won the Dow Jones Award for retail. And again, look at how they're stressing health and wellness is developed from a niche to a highly developed profit area. In food and beverage, Unilever have often won. And again, look at the importance of health, wellness, and nutrition as being a major growth category. Even in pharmaceuticals, where we think that everything they do is perfect and angelic, we know that the issues of comparative effectiveness and cost are starting to emerge as major issues that need attention. These are just 5 sectors. I could have gone through more. If I put up the chemical sector, no doubt Dow would have come up very positively. But notice that health is already being considered by the analysts. The challenge for us is to help them make sure that they have the right metrics. They focus on the material issues that will address the burden of disease challenges that Ali addressed. So let's just get a sense of scale. And being still an epidemiologist at heart, I like the numbers. And I think we in public health have failed to actually look at the size and scale of many of the leading corporations, both in terms of their potential to improve employee health, where, as you can see from the numbers, we're talking about populations of many millions, and more importantly, to address the impact of their products and services on billions of consumers. So if you look down the list, you'll see retail, for example, whether it's Tesco or Walmart, reaching hundreds of millions of customers and consumers a week. Food and beverage, again, 1 to 2 to 3 billion, depending on whether it's Nestle, PepsiCo, or some combination of companies. The alcohol sector, the tobacco sector, and so on. The reason for putting this up is really to ask the question, what happens as they embrace shared value for health? How do they turn their enormous reach and scale to good, as opposed to many of the concerns that WHO expresses in terms of the negative consequences? And you'll see on the next slide the same issues apply to the pharmaceutical industry, where they're touching a billion people around the world, or the insurance sector, or the sports sector. In the text, I'll go into some of the details of what exact changes would make a difference. But in the next slide, we try and provocatively jump to ask the question, how can we link changes in corporate attributable risk to increase GDP and profitability? And I'm hoping that we're going to persuade Ali and Chris Murray and his team to start looking at the potential attributable burden that could be addressed by companies in tackling the very many big risks that he highlighted. So let's have a look here. Hypertension. Almost 9 million deaths a year from hypertension. Well, which are the business sector roles that, if expanded, could actually tackle them? Well, no question that the pharmaceutical industry, combined with probably food and retail, could have a huge impact, particularly pharma and medical diagnostics, in terms of better screening, treatment, and medicine adherence. The data, though, suggests that in the low-middle-income countries of the world, only about a third of the people in the public sector have access to basic hypertension screening and treatment, and about half in the private sector, suggesting that if you're an investor in a pharmaceutical or medical device company, there's a huge opportunity to solve the biggest risk factor problem in the world by expanding up your scale and operations in a systematic way. The same is true, the same analogy applies to underweight, and I won't go into the obvious implications. But let's look at tobacco, where potentially you can have a huge impact to reduce risk products. And while many will have some discussion around are these going to work or not, we need to think about the potential scale that could be introduced if companies shifted fairly dramatically over the next decade from having traditional tobacco products to products that actually cut the risk by 90 to 95%, what it would do to the 6 million deaths. Similarly, with regard to alcohol or physical inactivity or dietary lack, the point of putting up these figures is to challenge us from our traditional public health approach, where we would say the solution lies in terms of taxes and regulations and public education programs, all of which, of course, are needed. But what happens if we start bringing in the power of market forces and align those so that companies get the reward and the benefit of solving the very problems that many of them have contributed to? Before ending, I think that the success of actually going in that direction requires a very careful understanding of the determinants of what drives change inside a corporation. Besides the obvious pressures of consumers demanding products, where we are seeing unprecedented interest in healthier and healthier products across the spectrum. What often hampers progress is the lack of spending in R&D. And this graphic puts up some very interesting data showing the total research and development funding by sector. Not surprisingly, you'll see pharmaceuticals way at the top and transport and insurance way at the bottom. Somewhere in the middle, you've got food and beverage, banking, telecommunications. Why I put it up is to say that one of the proof points about whether a company which has had a legacy involvement in products that may have been harmful to health, whether it's tobacco or alcohol or even motor vehicles before they started innovating, is whether they are really spending on innovating their way out of the problem. And to date, you can see that many of those legacy industries are also those where the spend on R&D is still extremely low, including the food and beverage sector, where Nestle and Danone would be at the top end, but many others not doing much innovation and still selling products high in salt, sugar, and fat would be at the low end. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more insights into this reality from Mahmood Khan when he talks later. What kind of metrics would we want to assess progress in terms of improved products and services? Metrics that would both be used inside the company to drive positive change in terms of profitability and solving social problems, but also that would be used by investors and asset managers to assess whether risk is being reduced materially in the community in the way they look at environmental risk, bad governance, or diversity risk. And I put up here just some initial ideas, really to hope that over the next month, people would think about and contribute to a discussion around how we could define those metrics, not for the health community, but for the CFO and for the CEO of companies. I think if we started doing that, and if we took a broader-based approach of realizing that health is late to come to the table of integrated reporting, environment is there, good governance is there, labor standards are there, and even some aspects of human rights and certainly corruption is there, it's now our time to actually start becoming far more visible in the integrated reports of a company because they are read and taken seriously by a CFO, a CEO, the asset managers, and the investors, which is really where the power, authority, and potential for change to where corporations go reside. And let me leave you with one concluding thought. The focus on metrics moves us away from the WHO concerns about trust or distrust. I love the quote by President Obama when he was asked about how can you possibly trust Iran on the nuclear deal, where he reminded us that the deal is not built on trust. It's built on verification, independent verification. The more we in public health can define what does verification mean for us, what does it mean if a tobacco company says the unthinkable, that they plan to actually be out of harmful tobacco-killing products over the next 2 decades? How will you verify that? How will you verify that an alcohol company is truly reducing the harm of their products, or that a food company has significantly shifted its portfolio, or that a pharmaceutical company is truly reaching the poorest to reach? It's only through a detailed, careful thought about the metrics that can be used. Let me end at that point, and thank you very much.